Good day,
Good day.
unwashed, bloodthirsty fight fans. That's about as good as it gets. This is Dallas Winston with Bloody Elbow. I'm here with Zane Simon today. Hi, Zane Simon.
Hey, Dallas. Winston.
Hey. We're gonna
Hey.
uh, we're gonna do a quick run through of tonight's Bellator 118 card. The headliner is Rafael Silva versus Joe Warren. Although there's been some last minute ins and outs and what have yous. Rafael Silva in the title fight. This was intended to be first. It was Joe Warren versus Eduardo Dantas for the title.
Yeah.
Eduardo Dantas was injured. Rafael Silva came up on short notice, kind of short notice, 3 weeks, but that motherfucker cuts a lot of weight.
Yeah,
So
he's a monster at
he's
135 or
35.
145. Is this 35 or 45? This is
It's got to be 35 because Dantas is the.
uh,
This is why everyone uses the show. Can someone let us
yeah,
know?
it's 135.
That's what I thought. So
Yeah.
Dantas is the bantamweight champion.
Yeah.
He's going to fight Warren. Dantas was injured. Silva stepped up, although when he got on the scale yesterday, he was 2 pounds over. And the other weight-cutting casualty, this one is actually both of them are bummers.
Yeah.
Rafael Silva is still fighting, although he's just fighting for shits and giggles or another
Yeah.
win on his record. He cannot become the interim champion if he wins, although Joe Warren, because he did make weight, can. The real
Yes.
pisser is Sam Oropeza, who's the man, Sammy O. It's like I always used to say it is not a Bellator show in Atlantic City without Sammy O on the card. Crowd loves him, good kid. He was over, and he's not in the tournament now. He's been replaced by Justin Baseman.
Yep. That's a crusher right there.
And it's a crusher because I know that Sammy O is just crushed by this too. I mean, this is the opportunity he's waiting for in front of his hometown crowd. He smoked Cristiano Souza in the quarters, early knockout, nasty left hook, and I know that he's really been out of shape about this. So heart goes out to Sammy O. That's a tough one.
It is.
Um, we both wanted to make a couple mentions on the preliminary card. Go ahead. You wanted to talk about Caldwell a little bit.
Yeah, well, obviously the big name on the undercard that people should be tuning into. I mean, even if you don't see the fight, you should be finding out the result and going back and watching it or trying to find it. Is Darian Caldwell, who's facing off against Joe Pingatore, or however you pronounce that, Pingatore. But Caldwell was a 2009 national champion, Division One at 147 pounds, and he's one of. I mean, he's sort of like, top flight wrestler to go into MMA recently. Who was the other guy that went to Bellator and has been struggling a bit? It was
Bubba Jenkins, maybe?
yeah, Bubba Jenkins. He and Bubba Jenkins both entered right at about the same time into MMA, and there was a lot of talk at the time like who's going to do better, who's going to transition better. And a lot of people felt that Caldwell has the better ceiling in MMA, but the big thing for him was that even in his college career, he's been plagued by a lot of shoulder injuries and injury problems. So, there's some mystery as to whether or not that's going to slow him down in MMA and whether or not that's taken a bit of a snap off his wrestling game. But he's 4-0 right now, and the guy he's facing, it's somebody he should beat. I mean, he's a top prospect. He should win this fight, but it's not a bad matchup. The guy's 4-1, and I saw a little tape on him. He looks not bad, nothing special, but should be a solid test for a young fighter early in his career.
I think I saw Bubba Jenkins in his Bellator debut, and hate to say it, but he was not really impressive, and he didn't really strike you as a wrestling standout because you always figure a guy with those kind of wrestling credentials, if all else fails, just start shooting doubles over and over and go back to your bread and butter. And he had some trouble doing that. I'm not sure if that's an issue with him transitioning, his wrestling skills transitioning, or maybe just the fact that it's MMA. Wrestling is definitely probably the most valuable if you're going to have one thing, but it's not something you can hang your hat on all the time.
Yeah, well, increasingly the thing that I've seen is that not only does wrestling not necessarily translate to great takedown skills, because the way that you take people, the takedown setups in wrestling don't all translate to MMA. There's a couple that do. Even Chael Sonnen's gone on record saying that, like, there's a double leg and a single leg and some chains off of that, but that's really like what MMA is about for wrestling takedown transition. Maybe he's oversimplifying, but the big thing that I've noticed too is not necessarily that wrestling doesn't necessarily translate into top control. You see a lot of guys who can get somebody down and then the guy just springs right back under them or up from under them.
I don't think I'm not sure how I wanted to word that. Maybe that it's kind of underrated or overlooked, but the way that guys have mastered using the fence for takedown defense, not just once you're taken down to, scoot backwards and put your back on it, but even on the feet. Before, you thought it was the kiss of death if a wrestler cornered you, put your back on the fence. That was like more wrestling, simulation where it's more in their environment. But man, when guys, lower their base and dig at least one good underhook in and get ready to switch that to a whizzer if it comes down to that, it's become really, I think, actually, I guess what I'm saying is just the art of takedown defense has been, before it was kind of this kind of auxiliary weapon, and now it's become a really big focus, and I think it's become kind of its own art in itself, and people are really, really advancing in it.
Well, I mean, like, even as one of the big takedown defenses that you've seen come across in the past, like, half decade, it's the one that's, like, Jose Aldo uses it really often, it's his go-to, is that you give up your front leg on a low single for a single leg, and then you turn and limp leg out of it, and you prop off the fence as you're limp legging to spin away. And that has become a really quality way of defending the takedown for guys that are just going to shoot on you. You don't give them a double, you give them a low single, and then you turn out.
Right. Yeah, just to be fairly nitpicky, I don't know if I'd say you give them your front leg, but you always make sure your back leg is free and that you can pivot and balance on that.
Well,
I was just saying.
I mean, yeah. I'm just saying that you don't square up in a way that makes the double leg available. It's like what Anderson Silva does too with his stance. Is he's got the front leg way out in front. He's got that sort of side-on stance almost, that makes the front leg much more accessible than getting in a full double.
And it might seem kind of obvious, but I think a different way that came to mind for both Silva and Aldo is just pivoting. I mean, just a defensive pivot, because you nailed it when you said you never want to be squared up on a wrestler. So a lot of guys are, and Silva was great at that, and Aldo too. If you're let's call that front leg somewhat sacrificial. You're aware, of course, you don't want anyone to snatch it up, but if they do, you can pivot off your back foot, limp leg out of it. And actually, I think that's one thing Ben Askren offensively for takedowns, when guys hit different angles and attack their guys from different positions that they're not prepared for. Just like with striking, a lot of the real good wrestlers, instead of coming head on, bullying forward and even trying to chain together a transition after that, all the good guys are coming in at an angle. When they transition, they're hitting a new angle. Just makes the defender work way
and you more. Have to switch from single to double to single and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, moving on, there was one other guy we wanted to mention briefly, which is Eugene Fadiora, just as somebody to watch. I mean, he looks like a pretty decent athlete. He's got a pretty great record. His only loss is to Gunnar Nelson in his career. So he's young. He's not the most exciting fighter in the world yet, but he's got a nice, sort of diverse, well-rounded set of skills, and he's a decent athlete, and he looks like somebody that could be one to watch in future Bellator shows. So somebody to keep an eye on.
Yep, totally agree. I want to say he's got a good amount of finishes, right? And they're nice, nicely balanced.
I think he's got more submissions than anything else, but he has a few KOs on his record. Yeah, he's got 8 submissions and 5 TKOs. So yeah, he's got a nice split. Watching him, he's definitely, I would say, more of a submission threat than anything else, or more of a grappling. That's like more of his primary offense, is to clinch grapple, cage, especially like cage grapple, standing underhook switches and things like that, and trying to drag an opponent down. But
fairly good. I'm sorry to interrupt, but fairly good sized cat too for 185.
Yeah,
pretty tall, strong, robust.
Yeah, he's 6'2", 185. I mean, he's a natural middleweight in this day and age. He'd be a light heavyweight a decade ago.
Yeah, that's true. All right, so moving on to the main card, this first matchup is actually one that might not be, lighting up a lot of people's eyes, but I'm really happy to see Liam McGeary finally kind of get some love and some exposure on the main card.
Hmm.
Um, and actually, the other guy he's fighting doesn't have kind of the hype behind him, but he's also undefeated, Mike
Yeah,
Musatelli. And these are both some big boys. I don't know if you have the stats right there, but
six
I want to
six
say,
for McGeary, 6'5" for Mudicelli.
what was McGeary?
6'6".
Is that right?
Yeah, that even in the Bellator broadcast they referenced it. So
No
unless
shit.
they're all lying,
Because I wanted to say that Musatelli, maybe he's got a bunch of length on him, but so these are both undefeated guys, and
yeah,
these guys are both kind of rising up and fighting to kind of get noticed, and this is their chance to do so. I want to say, first of all, I think McGee. I mean, he rightfully is gotten a little love from hardcores. I mean, the dude is
yeah,
like a finishing machine. He's violent. He's kind of like an early Ben Saunders, long, lanky, devastating Muay Thai. But
yeah,
the kicker is that this dude can finish on the ground as well. So a lot of people were, once word got out on his striking, they started to take him to the ground, and he started to notch some submission wins as well.
yeah.
So
He's got a very solid, like what I'd call like the European sort of skill set, which is that really sharp, powerful striking, and then a really aggressive ground game to go with it. You know?
super aggressive
Yeah,
ground game, because there's just using the threat of submissions. There was one guy that was taking him down at will, but he just every time angled his hips for an armbar, and I mean the epitome of what an active guard should be. As soon as he hit the ground, his hips were not stationary. He was cutting angles, moving all over, and attacking. And the guy could take him down all day, but he ended up not doing it because he was about to get tapped out. So
yeah.
this is going to be a pretty good fight. I'm interested to see if Musatelli, see, with McGeary, he's quick and he's an explosive striker. And
Hmm.
Musatelli, I think, strikes me as a guy that's going to be a little bit bigger and stronger, but he's not going to have the foot speed and the hand speed and just the overall like explosive ability that McGeary has.
Yeah, well, I
So
think it. I mean, I Moose Telly, from what little I've seen of him, watching him fight. I mean, he's the kind of guy who's gonna bull in. I like to think of them as grapplers who like to throw themselves at their opponent. It's not even so much of like, oh, my strikes have to land or they have to be pretty, or doesn't matter if I'm throwing a punch or a kick. I'm going to throw my body at you, and once my body hits you, I'm going to drag you down to the ground.
it's like the most primitive approach to getting into the phone booth when
Yeah,
that's your specialty. And I totally agree. His entries are going to be key on this. And McGeary he has an uncanny knack. He's like a slipe. I was going to say sliper. That could be some kind of slang term with a clever definition, but I don't have it right now. But he's excellent at countering when his opponent comes in,
yeah,
especially if his opponent comes in straight lines. I think we're to the point in MMA, kind of like what you're saying, where you can't just flick out a few, half-hearted distraction strikes and still secure a takedown if you're moving in a straight line. So
yeah.
this is going to be, I think, a really rough matchup for Musatelli. What I was going to say is I do think that Musatelli, this is totally out of my ass off the top of my head, but that he has experience fighting bigger guys, whereas McGeary has only fought guys that have been smaller with him throughout his career. Just a tiny little maybe X factor that may or may not come into play.
That could be. I'm not. I don't know that at all because of that. Neither of them have a lot of name. A lot of name recognition in their records. So it's not. That's not something I could easily speak to. I think the big question will just be. I think Musatelli might be a bit more controlling on the ground. He might be a little more solid in his grappling and wrestling base. And so the big question will be if McGeary can keep himself moving well enough on the outside, and if it does hit the ground, whether his submission grappling or his ability to switch out and get back to his feet are advanced enough for somebody who might be more polished and might be more controlling and might be as big as him. Because
Totally agree.
that's really where the test is going to come in. Because I
Totally agree
know,
on all that. I
yeah,
think it's going to be hard for Musatelli to, number one, close range, number two, get it to the ground, and then once he gets it there, I'll go back to Liam being ridiculously offensive, not only in the ground but in all facets of the fight. So this actually should be a pretty compelling matchup, and I'm happy to see it. I'm going to go McGeary. I assume you are too.
I'd go McGeary just because I think that in general the nature of MMA has switched. That if I were to pick, and there are no pure fighters anymore, but if you were to look at like a pure striker versus pure grappler matchup, 15 years ago you'd pick the grappler every time. And these days, you're getting to the point where it's much more picking the striker every time because the strikers have enough takedown defense to stay up, and grapplers, it's still really hard to learn how to strike effectively.
Yeah, agree on that one too. We're kind of getting all trippy and philosophical, but a while back in my fight picks, when I actually gave a shit about them and put a lot of thought into them, I noticed the tide was turning because before, if you were unsure, the guy who could land takedowns was the safer bet. And I remember thinking, damn, that rule of thumb is almost in reverse now. Maybe that goes back to the takedown defense thing we were talking.
Yeah.
All right, so moving forward to the next one. I'm sorry, do you have something else you want to say?
No.
Next one of my old favorites, man, Marcus Galvão Louro, which means blonde in Portuguese. He was the only blonde Brazilian I can think of off the top of my head. But he actually had a run way back in the day in the WEC, fought some good competition and lost. And everyone was really down on him after that. You know, the typical, this is the guy that got shit canned in the WEC. When he first came into Bellator, and first of all, he's a Nova União. He used to be a Nova União guy. I'm pretty sure he started to hook up with Vitor Shaolin Ribeiro in New York City, and now he's, I think, starting his own, like Long Island MMA.
Yeah, I see him listed at Marcos Galvão MMA and Long Island MMA. So
I think he's kind of started his own. He's branched off, and he'd be doing his own thing right now. But I love this cat. So back when he was with Nova União, you know, those guys are all, and he's a highly ranked Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. But you would never guess it if you saw this dude fight. I mean, he just throws bricks. That's it. I mean, this dude swings for the fences every single time. I actually thought when I really got excited about him is when he fought Joe Warren and lost. I guess you'd call it controversial. I kind of thought he got jobbed on that one, but phenomenal takedown defense, especially in the clinch. Real tough, scrappy dude.
Yeah, no, I mean, I like him a lot. I think, you know, you look at who he's lost to, and it's a split decision to Alexis Villa, a debatable decision to Joe Warren, and before that you have to go all the way back to 2009. And
Dantas, too.
That fight against Dantas, which, honestly, watching that fight, you could tell that everything about that matchup was a mistake.
It was a friend's fight. You know what was crazy about that is you got that vibe from Galvão, but you did not get it from Dantas.
No.
Oh, man.
No, and Galvão, I mean, even afterward, he was irate about the whole thing. He was just like, not only did he feel betrayed by Bellator for getting pushed into that fight, but he felt betrayed by Dantas for for taking it that seriously, I think, for like just going out there and blasting him.
Yeah, that's an ugly situation. Although at the end of the day, there's so many times. I mean, we've all heard Dana White bitch going back to Fitch and the AKA guys. These are two not only just teammates, but good buddies. Galvão was like a mentor to Dante, and hell, they scrapped it out. So I guess respect to him for that. So the guy he's fighting, Thomas Vasquez. We spent a little time before we went live talking about him. Go ahead.
No, yeah, I was gonna say he seems like a bit of a TMA guy, and especially I know you were saying you knew a little bit about his background, and he's got a very martial arts style. He keeps his hands low, he moves his feet a lot, he does a lot of side kicks, a lot of snap kicks, things like that, and very much a traditional martial arts style in MMA, and he's not a bad fighter. He looks like a pretty decent athlete, and he's got a nice bag of tools. But he's got a big challenge ahead of him in Galvão.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just a younger guy, Galvão is pretty much. I mean, he's been. I don't know how you want to rate him. To me, he's a top level fighter. He's been always nipping at that elite. And again, it depends on your perspective, but he's a tough match for anybody. I mean, look at, Joe Warren and Alexis Villa are probably amongst, I can't think of any more highly decorated wrestlers, maybe besides the Caldwell that you just mentioned. amongst the most decorated wrestlers in all of Bellator. And
Hmm.
Galvao gave him fits. I mean, these guys had trouble taking him down, and when they did, he usually popped back up. And you nailed it with Vasquez, a super eclectic arsenal on the kid. I mean, everything from shades of like capoeira and some like super traditional, like drunken monkey, old school kung fu. And he's a really like intelligent, creative kid on the rise. And it's kind of like some of the guys we said before, although I think McGeary's kind of demonstrated, he's blown people out in Bellator before. So there's a
Yeah.
lot more questions surrounding Vasquez. I'm really excited to see the kid, although, like we were saying, when you fight a guy like Galvao, that's far from like a clean palette for you to just show your style on. So
Yeah.
especially like what you said with his traditional martial arts style, you said this beforehand, so I'll give you credit for it. The only guys that have been successful in that, it's been predicated on their cage movement, because when you kind of have the tendency to leave your hands down and rely more on movement and timing as how you deal with the striking game, not necessarily as defense, but your movement is going to be super critical. And one thing I will say, Galvao just throws cinder blocks. I mean, the dude is just and he's tough as hell, really hard to finish. But the one area he really lacks in is that movement. He's pretty much a
Yeah.
put your head down, and throw meatballs until someone falls over. So you kind of got to go with Galvao, just based
Oh,
on experience,
I
status, and all that.
I honestly think Galvao's going to knock him out. I mean, nothing I've seen from Vasquez shows that he has so much movement that he's not going to get hit. And the way he carries himself, I mean, because the thing is, like, part of that movement, and when I talk about part of that movement is really active upper body movement. You look at Lyoto Machida, especially in the last 5 years, his torso is on a swivel at all times. You don't see that static, straight up and down sort of what Machida kind of started as. These days, it's all dips and shoulder rolls and little movements to set up opponents and to keep him really hard to hit. And Vasquez doesn't have any of that.
Yeah, I actually used to use that term, when I would describe, like, so for example, Machida and his movement, he really has three different planes of movement. It's his feet and his footwork, and then his upper body. You could even add the category with his head being separately for that, because there's times he'll, roll one way but move his head another. And then, of course, his punches and kicks, so his hands and his feet. Those are almost like four different, autonomous like centers of movement for Machida.
Yeah.
The big test, I think, Vasquez is going to be, if he doesn't want, even though his striking is super dynamic and diverse, we need more than that. At the end of the day, that's just the striking game. Even if he has no prayer, I think that he needs to mix it up a little bit by at least changing levels and attacking Galvao, because that's going to be the best way to keep him at bay. The other good way is just throw a straight right down the pipe to keep people off you, but that's a little bit more towards playing Galvao's game. So as dynamic as his striking is, I actually think the other parts of his game and the questions surrounding him are going to be pretty emphasized here.
Yeah, and from what I've seen, his wrestling, I mean, he's willing to grapple and wrestle, and not, maybe not a bad grappler, but his wrestling is pretty basic, and Galvao's is anything but. So I would not terribly sold on that as an avenue.
Kind of a weird, creepy silence there, but I think that's pretty normal now. Or I guess usually when with foreign fighters, whether they're Brazilian or English or whatever, now we kind of say they're not good at wrestling, but that's because over the last, I don't know, whatever decade, wrestling has grown more and more prominent, where before that they're usually damn good at striking and submission grappling, because they think, hey, even if you can take me down, you still got to deal with my submission game. So that to me is the hardest one. I think a guy without any super formal wrestling background is doing well if it's not a big hole in his game
Yeah.
at the onset, at this stage in his career. Of course, that's going to be something he'll want to brush up on in the future.
Yeah,
So
I'm just saying, I don't think he's not gonna submit Galvao. I don't think he's gonna take him down, and at that point, he's gonna have trouble.
not unless he dings him with a punch first and then just uses that to pounce or whatever. But I would
But
not be surprised, really. I guess I would like to throw out just an upset alert for Vasquez, because there's a whole ton of reasons why Galvao should not only beat him, but maybe even run over him. But you know, you never know. Galvao is deadly, but he does have a very, very expectable and predictable style. He's going to come forward and try to take your head off. So I'll just throw that out there.
All right. Forewarned is forearmed.
All right, so everyone give me 10% of your money and not Zane if Vasquez pulls off this big upset tonight. All right, so this next one, moving into kind of the co-main event slot. This is, again, a bummer. Nothing against Justin Baseman. But, man, this is where Sammy O got dropped off, and the fight with Koreshkov would have been a beauty.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, at this point, I really don't have a ton to say, and it's nothing against Baseman. I mean, I think he's tough as hell. I mean, the dude, as far as heart and will, I mean, he's got all that in spades. From a skill standpoint, he's, I'd say, B plus, A minus, and this is kind of in comparison to, more of the top guys, at least, definitely in Bellator. It depends. I don't know. You can open a whole can of worms there. So I'm holding him to a high standard. Like on the regional scene, Justin Baseman is the kind of guy that can clean people up. But against Koreshkov, and again, what I said about Baseman and not him, I don't think he has a chance here. And mostly it's because Koreshkov is a lunatic, man. The dude is really, really impressing me over and over. Finishing qualities, tough, highly offensive. So I don't know how Baseman can win this one, honestly.
Yeah, no. I mean, Baseman, he's a fun brawler. He's experienced. He does well on the regionals, like you say. He's got a long record and he's had a lot of success. But he's definitely one of those guys whose strength is that they're not bad at anything and that they're really tough. Like, no major holes.
And he doesn't have he doesn't have that one area of the fight or that one weapon that he needs to impose.
Yeah. And Koreshkov has already shown that, he can take somebody, even, somebody like Nishan Burrell, who's really athletic and very well-rounded, and just totally destroy them in almost no time at all.
I don't know if I mentioned this, but it was really... Did you notice that when they flashed, how they flashed back to the guys in the back room training or hitting the mitts, getting ready before the fight? They showed Koreshkov working with Shlemenko, and he was working like this weird kick. It was almost like... And when I say shin kick, not like a traditional, roundhouse kick that lands with the shin. It was more like a chambered kick that the whole contact portion was the whole shin. And I remember thinking, that's kind of odd. I'm not... And it was almost like the cross between a jumping knee and a kick. And I remember thinking, that's kind of an odd thing. And as soon as the fight started, man, he landed that identical kick. And it clipped Nishan Burrell right on the chin and put him out. I thought that was kind of fascinating, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think Koreshkov, he's the kind of guy who could compete in the top 20 anywhere. He may not always be in, and that's not meant to be like any slight or anything. I mean, like, if he's in the UFC, he's a top 20 fighter. If he's in Bellator, he's a top 10 fighter. Anywhere, any level of competition, he's going to be in the upper tier in his division. And Baseman's the kind of guy that I just think, he's really great on the regional, but seems like the kind of transitional fighter who they're great on the regional, they get to the higher level, and they just don't have those tools they need to really consistently win fights. And they go back to the regionals, and they're great on the regionals, and they get to the higher level, and he just, Dennis Hallman remind me of that a lot.
Don't you dare.
Okay.
Dennis Hallman's a pimp, man.
Latter day Dennis Hallman, who, I mean, and it's respectable. It's a respectable place to be. It's really solid to be the kind of guy that will always win regional fights and can always get to the higher level, but just can't stay there.
Dennis Hallman took John Makdessi down, finished him in the first round. I'm just throwing that out there.
He did, and I didn't say they're going to lose every fight. Did I say they're going to lose every fight?
No, Dennis Hallman's one of my old school favorites.
Okay, well maybe Dennis Hallman's a bad example. How about like a David Mitchell?
I know. Yeah, that's fine. You don't have to. I'm just being a dick. I'll always defend like my personal favorites tooth and nail. So
no, that's fine. I'm not backing down.
So I'm taking Koreshkov here, and really the thing with Baseman is he's another guy that it's he's solid all the way around, but Koreshkov is not going to let him get inside and get close. Koreshkov is going to keep him out on the fringe, on the end of his punches, and that's an area where really a fighter that's solid in all areas is not going to do well being forced to do play an artsy fartsy fringe striking game with a guy as long, as precise, and as fluid as Koreshkov on the feet. So,
Yeah.
and on top of that, this is a welterweight tournament semifinal. If this were a regular old matchup, maybe I would. But Koreshkov is not going to let, with this much on the line. I don't see him doing anything but kind of kicking his ass, to be honest. No offense to Baseman or his fans, and he's taking it short notice.
Oh yeah, no, and that's a huge problem. Like that's not one of those. That's not something you can dismiss and be like, oh, he's still got, he should still be at 100%. No, we've seen even in the UFC in the past month, we've seen 2 or 3 fights where somebody's come in on a few days or a week and they look terrible, and he's doing this on 24 hours. You can't just not have a camp.
Right, and actually, much respect to him for doing that. I mean,
Yeah.
the window doesn't get a whole lot thinner than 24 hours before you're going to step into the cage. So, respect to Baseman for that. All right, we'll move on to the main event: Rafael Silva versus Joe Warren. What are you thinking on this? Because I might be smelling an upset.
Well, I guess I don't know what the odds are, so I can't tell you if I'm smelling an upset or not.
That's a
But
good point. I guess I should say I'm leaning towards Rafael Silva here.
I'm leaning towards Rafael Silva too, and I'm wondering how much of that is just personal prejudice.
See, I actually like Joe Warren. I think
Well, and yeah,
there's certain guys where it becomes obvious. I don't think it's a stretch that really Joe Warren does not honestly think he's the bad man. You know what I mean?
no, and I
Warren's
don't.
to the point where he's trolling people now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't like have anything personally against the guy. I always hate that, like the idea of like, oh, I hate such and such fighter or something like that. But it's just one of those things that sort of like wiggles into the edges of picking perception, where
Oh yeah.
even if you're not like, oh, I don't hate him. I'm like, I've never even met Joe Warren. How can I hate the guy? You know.
I'm not gonna fucking pick him.
But it's just in the. But then I think about the pick. I'm like, oh, Joe Warren. I'm not picking Joe Warren.
Yeah. I don't hate him personally, but I kind of dislike him and his antics enough not to pick him. That's what
exactly. Yeah. And
that's fair. That to me, that's level-headed perception.
and I'm not. So I can't say. So I'm wondering if that's playing a part in this because he had a 2-fight losing streak where he lost badly in the middle of his career. To Alexis Villa and Pat Curran, both great fighters. And after that, he's been fine. He's been great. Like, he's not losing. He's not going out there and getting blown up.
Actually, he's looked improved. We saw him take down, and I don't remember seeing Joe Warren even look to pass guard, but he hit a takedown, pass guard, and got in that weird, I don't even remember what it was. It was almost like a reverse triangle position, and it was kind of funky. But then he kept going, and I want to say he finished that with a triangle and an arm bar.
Yeah.
And then that's a reminder that Joe Warren has really only been training hardcore MMA for like 4 or 5 years now. I mean, in all reality, he's a baby in the sport.
Yeah, his career is young. He could still be peaking. His transition striking is improved, as he showed with that knee against Travis Marks. He's getting a lot better at getting in and out of his grappling with strikes. And, so it's hard for me to be like, oh, Joe Warren should just get dominated here. I think the thing for me is just that Silva is so big and strong that I wonder, and he uses wrestling as a predominant tool. He's not just like big and strong and sits on the outside and strikes. He's big and strong, and he will go in and shoot the double and, look to grapple and things like that. And I just think that he's dynamic enough on the outside, and he's good enough at changing levels off of his striking and taking opportunities that I think he can make the fight kind of hell on Warren. But like I said, part of that may just be personal perception of just feeling like I'm not picking Joe Warren.
Well, and I think that, maybe the positive way to look at that is it is hard not to like Rafael Silva. I mean, the
Yeah,
dude he's a master of capoeira. Usually when we see, Brazilian guys, it's not uncommon for them to be at least aggressive and vicious on the feet and also have good submissions. And he has all of that, except, with his capoeira, and he's got a Thai background, so his striking is pretty fairly polished and
yeah,
really well rounded, and it's like fight applicable. It's
yeah.
not just like training. Like the dude knows how to scrap. On top of that, he has a jiu-jitsu, and he's the biggest, or what he's most proud of, is a lucha libre background, because he trains under Brigadeiro, who I always mention. Marcelo Brigadeiro is the grappling coach at Team. I never know how to say that. Calban,
I
who
can't help you there.
Paul Sass and all that clique, and
Yeah,
Brigadeiro trains under Cromado Barbosa, who runs the Hanal Vical fight team in Brazil, and that's like the assembly line for lucha libre fighters nowadays. Falcao was there before he had his little gas station incident.
yeah,
But either way, my point is with Silva, he's extremely diverse, not just solid in all three, striking, wrestling / takedowns, and grappling, but he's got like some capoeira. His grappling is really intelligent because he's got a little bit of that lucha libre mentality of just going after any submission, even if it
yeah,
might not be ideal. Like, he's not afraid to take risks, and he's a big ass boy for
yeah.
that's why he couldn't make weight. But he's a tall ass bantamweight. Am I wrong? Isn't he? Do you have?
I have it right here. He is, well, he's actually not that tall. Mostly it's just that he's really broad across his torso. He's only
How tall is he?
he's only listed at 5'7". That may be wrong.
That's not too bad for a bantamweight, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Like, how tall is Warren? I want to say Warren's like 5'4" or 5'5", right?
Warren is small. Warren he's always been small. He's 5'5". He's Warren's thick enough to compete at bantamweight, but he's flyweight sized.
And I want to say that Rafael Silva is also just kind of long, and
Yeah,
he's not scrawny, so he's just a really, really good size for the weight class, really athletic.
he's got
The
the
thing
G.
that's going to be tough here, yeah, he does. The thing that's going to be tough is, I don't remember but we were saying this before, where I still think, even though Rafael Silva is pretty good for a wrestler, that Warren will be able to take him down. However, it's going to be all about Joe's entries, how he comes in. And I mean, if you're planning for Joe Warren, you should be planning on a couple big punches and a takedown coming right behind it.
Yeah,
But once he gets him there, I mean, we'll definitely see if Joe Warren has evolved his submission grappling, and if so, how much, because Silva is a killer off his back. He's not just Aoki like in the fact that he's going to chain submissions together, but he can strike off his back. He's really unpredictable. He likes to bait and switch. He's got really good sweeps. He's just a really intelligent grappler. Joe Warren's, with his background, he's got the kind of base that can shut down, a lot of all that shit. There's a lot of excellent BJJ techniques off your back, but if you have a wrestler who understands the general framework of those and has a really, really strong base and knows when to punch you in the face. And I think Warren's getting better with some of that, but tough matchup for him. I guess I'm going to go Silva here. You too?
I'm going Silva, but I don't. I don't think that it's just, like I said, I don't think it's all about like skill and matchup. I'm going Silva partially, just as a personal thing, and I do think he's on a 13-fight win streak, and he's not getting it for nothing. And he's big, and he's strong, and he wrestles and grapples and strikes well. He's dynamic. I just don't see a good reason to pick against him, but I do think that I don't think that he's just going to walk through Warren. But it's a good matchup. It's a good fight, honestly. It really.
I agree with that, because he doesn't have huge punching power. He's not really the kind of guy who's going to load up and land one walk away KO via right hand or whatever. And short notice is a little bit of a bigger deal for him because he cuts so much.
Yeah.
And he's got the trip from Brazil. So something people don't think of is when that happens.
How far away out did he get this call?
I think it was 2.5, 3 weeks ago, a little less than 3 weeks. But a lot of people don't understand. I know guys who have spent 4 or 5 days when they find out just fucking around with their visa. I mean,
Yeah.
they have to drive and apply for it, and so 4 or 5 days of their training or some amount is just spent with travel plans and that kind of thing. Plus, then he had to make the trip, cut weight.
Yeah.
So I
It
think
does
we're
add
both
a,
pretty high
it
on
does
him.
add a separate dimension. It's a dimension that I don't usually like to. I don't usually like to dwell on it because it's not quantifiable.
And you never know. Like if he loses, we're never going to know if it's from any of that shit. But I just thought it'd be worth mentioning because I was going to say I think we're both pretty high on Rafael Silva. Would you
Hmm.
agree?
Yeah, no, I think he's a great talent, and it is one of those things where I think, as a personal rule, I tend to try and take into account a short notice fight if it's less than 3 weeks. But so yeah, I mean, it could certainly be a big factor in this, but I'm going with him because I'm high on him as a talent, and I really do think that he's got a great, you know, top 10 kind of ceiling.
Me too. And I'm really looking for not that he's going to win this, but I'm very intrigued by a matchup between him and Dantas because real athletic, offensively explosive. Well,
Yeah.
Joe Warren's the kind of bull-headed, hard-nosed bastard that you're not going to have an easy fight against him. I mean, we saw Pat Curran unloaded. I don't even know how many. Did anyone ever count those? It was like 17, 18 clean, unhindered strikes to the face, and Warren would just not go down, man. So
Well,
he's a
yeah,
tough bastard.
that that may just be like, you cut the head off a chicken that runs around for a while. I mean, that was such a brutal knockout for Warren. I can't, like, I mean, it speaks to his toughness, but there's nothing. I can't take anything good away from that moment. Like, as a sport of MMA, it was such a, like, there's so much badness in that stoppage that I can't just be like, oh, but he's so tough. Like, yeah, he was getting brutalized for like
He
5 minutes.
was. But the reason that stood out to me is most guys get brutalized when they take one to maybe two, three, four completely wide open shots. And I mean, that was a dozen plus. That was quite a few. So I'm just, trying to be positive, Zane, damn it.
Yeah, well, okay. I'm sure. I get it.
You sound real on board with that. Oh, be positive. Well, all right, whatever. All right, we
Yeah.
need to wrap this shit up. You got
Uh,
anything else you want to say?
no, I think we've covered everything top to bottom and a few things on the side, so I'm good.
Indeed, we have. All right, do you like? I never leave my Twitter handle and all that shit. Do you feel inclined to do that today? Because you have the platform too now.
If you don't wanna, fuck it. That's not a big deal.
That's right. So if you guys want to find us on Twitter, you got to work for this ass. Go out and put a little effort into it. All right, just kidding. We better say it by now. At the Zane Simon, I'm at Uncle Justice. Thanks everybody for listening.
Or did you get
At
that?
the Zane Simon, my bad. We're gonna try to get our shit together and do just a quickie out like this on the Bellator cards regularly if we can. So that is our goal. Don't hold us
If
to it.
Dallas can, don't bring me into this. I'm always here.
It's not true. All right, y'all. Thanks, Zane. Have a
All
good
right.
weekend, everybody.
Yeah.